Okay, good morning.
Good morning.
It's a warm welcome to all of us, particularly our visitors, Mr. King. I don't know if we should continue calling him a visitor, but nevertheless, he is here today with us. We also have our sister who is seated to Mrs. Nota. I hope I haven't seen another visitor. Those that are, yes, and my brother who is sitting right at the back there. He visits us once in a while. So you are all welcome to be with us this morning. Our reading was taken from the book of Acts chapter 5. We are going to go to that reading just now. But I want us to, while we are opening our Bibles back to Acts chapter 5, I want us to know that the background to this verse that was written to us, or to these verses that were read to us this morning, come, of course, from the background that we read in Acts chapter 4. So we are going to go for a little while in Acts chapter 4 and talk about a little bit of things that are going to give us a build up to the story that we read in Acts chapter 5. What we know for sure in Acts chapter 4 is that Peter and John, in chapter 3, the church has just begun in Jerusalem. In chapter 2, of course, with 3,000 Christians on the day that were baptized. Peter and John are going to go around preaching, and of course they are going to meet this man who was a blind man. They are going to cause him to see, but that's going to cause some problems, particularly for Peter and John. They are going to be arrested. So after they've been arrested, chapter 4 begins telling us about, or it's a continuation of the story that we read about in chapter 3. And chapter 4 says, and as they were speaking to the people, this is Peter and John, and of course other apostles as well, were also speaking to the people. While they were speaking to the people, the priests and the captain of the temple and the Sadducees came upon them, greatly annoyed, because they were teaching the people and proclaiming Jesus, the resurrection from the dead. And they arrested them, and they put them in custody until the next day, for it was already evening. But listen to what verse 4 says. But many of those who had heard the word believed, and the number of the men came to about 5,000. So we are being told about men only that have come up to about 5,000. We don't know how many women that we can actually count. So we surely have him maybe in the excess of 10,000 people who have become Christians. Now, at least from Acts chapter 2, from the day of the Pentecost until now, we have men that are numbering 5,000, plus women definitely who also have become Christians. Now, let's go down in chapter 4 to verse 32 and connect the 5,000 that we have seen to what is happening. Verse 32 then says, now the full number of those who believed were of one heart and soul, and no one said that any of the things that belonged to him was his own, but they had everything in common. You know, it's always a wonder to me that there was no one who was in a need. I mean, we have talked about 5,000 men plus women. Maybe we are talking of in excess of 10,000 people in Jerusalem who have become Christians. But this statement says none of them was in a need. What makes me, wonder there is the fact that I will really, maybe before I make that comment, let me proceed and I will make that comment just one. Verse 33 then says, and with the great power the apostles were giving their testimony to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus, and great grace was upon them all. There was not a needy person among them, for as many as were owners of lands or houses sold them and brought the proceeds of what was sold, and they laid it at the apostles' feet, and it was distributed to each as any had need. Thus, Joseph, who was also called by the apostles Barnabas, which means son of encouragement, he was a Levite, a native of Cyprus. He sold a field that belonged to him, and he brought the money and laid it at the apostles' feet. This is what is amazing me about this whole thing. How are you able to put together, in such a union, over 10,000 people? I mean, we have seen churches with barely 50,000 members. They are actually scattered in terms of unity. They actually don't know each other. This could be a fact. I don't know us here, Hillside, if we really know each other well. We are barely 50. But do we really know each other? That I can even break wherever I am and say, I know that at Hillside no member is in a need. Because I really know the needs of every one of us. Do you really know the needs of every one of us here? Neither do you know your own needs. But we are talking of the number of Christians that were numbering over 10,000 in Jerusalem. One factor that we are actually being told about them is that there was no one who had any need. But this is something that I want you to think about. These people were selfless. Everybody who owned prized possessions, they went and they sold those prized possessions. Imagine if you were ever, I mean, how many of us are ever going to dream of selling your house simply because people at church actually don't have things to eat? So let me also sell my house and I go and I share with them. Let me sell my car. If anything, if I get money, I would actually want to buy more cars and even to buy more houses for myself. These people were selfless. There is a man that is called Barnabas. We are actually told, right at the end, they were told about this man who was called Joseph initially, but the apostles are going to call him Barnabas simply because they are saying, we are looking at a man who is the son of encouragement. So they are going to call Barnabas, they are going to call Joseph Barnabas. This man originated from Cyprus. He was a Levite, by tribe. Cyprus, we know, is just off Israel. As you go into the Mediterranean Sea, it's actually the biggest island that you find in the Mediterranean Sea. Barnabas came from Cyprus. He is now living in Israel. I don't know whether the part of land that he's selling was in Cyprus or it was now in Israel. But nevertheless, he also is going to sell a field that belonged to him, and he brought the money and he laid it at the apostles' feet. Now that gives us the background to what we are now going to talk about, which is a continuation again in chapter 5. Remember, when the Bible was written, there were no chapters, there were no verses. This was a continuous story. But of course, whoever decided to put the Bible in chapters and verses was a genius. That has actually helped us understand and appreciate the Bible easier. Imagine if it was just one story from the book of Genesis right up to the Revelation. You are just reading, that big story. It would sort of confuse you. So this story that is in chapter 4 and in chapter 5 is actually happening at the same time. So chapter 5 verse 1 then says, but a man who was named Ananias with his wife Sapphira sold a piece of property, just like what everybody is doing. But let's also understand, we may be asking ourselves the question and say, why are these people at this particular juncture, why are they selling their properties? What has happened? Why is it that all of a sudden a multitude of people don't have food to eat? Why should these people have to sell their possessions? This is the situation. We know for sure that during the time of the Passover, of course, that is exactly when the time that Jesus was crucified on the cross. During the Passover, one of the most significant feasts of the Jews, everybody would come at this particular time. We know Jews are now scattered all over the world. Of course, owing to the capture that happened, of course, they were captured by Nebuchadnezzar. They had been captured by Assyria. Now they are under the Romans. Some of them are actually living in Rome. All over the globe, Jews are scattered. But for these important feasts like Passover, they would come from everywhere. They would actually come to Jerusalem to perform or to observe these feasts. It is during this time that they have come for Passover that Jesus is going to be crucified. But they have to wait for at least 50 days in Jerusalem for them to also observe Pentecost, which was called the Feast of Weeks. It was now on the day of Pentecost right here in Jerusalem when the church is going to begin. When the church is going to begin, and it began on the day with 3,000 people. Now, the subsequent days that are going to follow, the day of Pentecost, are going to be very interesting and very important. Because the apostles are going to continue preaching. In fact, we have just seen that Peter and John are going to be arrested. because they are continuously preaching to the people. Many people now, we've just been told about 5,000 men, they are going to turn to Christ, they are going to turn to God, of course, because the apostles are preaching. What is now happening is there are some people that have traveled all the way from Rome who are supposed to have gone back. There are some people that have come from Babylon who are supposed to have gone back. There are some people who are now coming from the east, wherever, who are supposed to have gone back, but they haven't gone back because they want to listen to what is being taught. We know for sure that one of the men who was supposed to have gone back, who did not go back immediately, is this man that was called the Ethiopian eunuch. We read about him in Acts chapter 8. They are all going to remain in Jerusalem and they are listening to the apostles' teaching. Obviously, they are going to run out of budget. I mean, when you visit one country, you always project your budget. You know I'm going to be there for the next 1 month. So at least what I may need is this and this and this and this. You carry along what you think is going to be sufficient for you. But if you are going to overlive or outlive your visit, you are obviously going to run out of budget. You need a resupply. Let's understand that we are talking of 2,000 plus years ago, where you actually did not have Visa, MasterCards, debit cards, etc. Where you could just call somebody back home and say, can you put money in my card, and then you access it there. Perhaps all their things were physical at the time. You cannot have money from Rome. In fact, it took them a long time to travel across the sea to come to Rome. You needed money. So these people are going to starve. So it's likely that those who were natives of Jerusalem, who actually had property in Jerusalem, are the ones who are going to say, our visitors who are listening to the word of God cannot starve while we are here. So let's sell whatever we have so that we sustain everybody. They are going to sell everything that they have. One of those that did this noble work is Ananias and Sapphira. This couple, they also sold their piece of land. So that's the story we are reading now in chapter 5. Verse 2 says, and with his wife's knowledge, he kept back for himself some of the proceeds and brought only a part of it, and he laid it at the apostles' feet. This was not a problem. Keeping money was not a problem, as we are going to discover. That's not what was the problem at this particular time. But nevertheless, they agreed that let's keep some money. We are not going to give all of it. Then verse 3 says, but Peter said, Ananias, why has Satan filled your heart to lie to the Holy Spirit and to keep back for yourself part of the proceeds of the land? Ananias lied to God. In fact, it's interesting to me that if we don't have a record right here where Ananias came to Peter and said, what we are giving you is all. But Peter, of course, being inspired by the Holy Spirit that was in him, he saw what Ananias had not said. Ananias did not say a word. But whatever his action, Peter was able to see that you are deceiving. In fact, there is full of deception in you. And he's going to ask him a question and say, why? Ananias, why has Satan filled your heart to lie to the Holy Spirit and to keep back for yourself part of the proceeds of the land? I'm still saying keeping back the proceeds was not a problem. But there is this deceit that is in that is in Ananias' heart, which Peter has seen, and we are going to discover it just now. So in verse 4, Peter is then going to tell us that this was not, the problem was not them keeping the money, but this is what the problem was. In verse 4 he says, while it remained unsold, while you had your property, wasn't it yours? While it remained unsold, did it not remain your own? And after it was sold, was it not at your disposal? Why is it that you have contrived this deed in your heart? You have not lied to men, but you have lied to God. We can only understand that what Peter is saying, you had control Ananias and Sapphira for your property. It was yours. Even after you sold. For example, if you sold it for $1,000 US, still $1,000 was yours. If you decided that out of 1,000 you want to only give 100, you still had the right to do that. The problem that they made, it would appear, is that they sold it for 1,000, I'm just saying, and they actually came and perhaps gave in 100, but then they claimed that the 100 is all that we realized from the sale. And that is where the lie was. If they had come to Peter and they had said, we sold our land for 1,000, we are keeping 900 for ourselves, but we are giving 100 to God, there would not have been any problem. This is exactly what Peter is saying in verse 4. It was yours before you sold. You still had control over that money even after selling. Why then are you lying? Verse 5. When Ananias heard these words, he fell down and breathed his last. And great fear came upon all who heard of it. The young man rose, and they wrapped him up and carried him out and buried him. How could they bury someone's husband without the knowledge of the wife? I always wonder. Let's go to verse 7 and see. After an interval of about 3 hours, his wife came in, of course not knowing what had happened. This is my question. Ananias is going to be buried. He's going to die. He's going to be buried. The wife is still at home. She's still to come perhaps to the gathering. She doesn't know that the husband is dead. In fact, the husband is already buried. When she came, verse 8 says, and Peter said to her, tell me whether you sold the land for so much. And she said, yes, for so much. Now, we see that Sapphira is now going to lie physically. Ananias did not. Ananias, Peter saw what was in him. But of course, with the wife, Peter is going to ask the question and say, is this how much you realized from the sale? And she's going to say, yes, we sold it for that much. But Peter said to her, how is it that you have agreed together to test the Spirit of the Lord? Behold, the feet of those who have buried your husband are at the door, and they will also carry you out. Immediately she fell down at his feet, and she breathed her last. When the young men came in, they found her dead, and they carried her out and buried her beside her husband. And great fear came upon the whole church and upon all who heard of these things. Let's conclude what we are talking about here. The first thing that I want us to notice, which I've already talked about, is that this was now a very big group. But what we have learned from this very big group is that they were united. Let's also continue understanding and remembering that this very group that we are being told about here, which was of one mind, is that very group which had started a few months, perhaps less than a year now, on the day of Pentecost in Jerusalem, when the apostles stood up and prayed. And of course, we know that that was the beginning of the church that Jesus had always promised in Matthew 16:18, I'm going to build my church. And that church actually started. And that church started growing in Jerusalem. What is also very important is for us to know that this church is not existing anywhere else except in Jerusalem. I suggest we light our flags. I see people are getting brave, but of course they are. It's what? Please, Mr. Derek, Nasha, can you light the flags, please? I see a problem. Okay. So this is the same group that we actually know that actually began on the day to become Christians. Then this is the group that was of one mind. Some of its members, who of course had some things to sell, they sold everything so that everybody is not going to have anything. But our story is on Ananias and Sapphira, who also went out and they did a good thing, and they also sold whatever they had. But there is a problem, which they are going to run themselves into. They lie. That's lesson number one that I want us to take away. Let us take away this issue of lying. Because ourselves, we should also do well to avoid lying. Why should we avoid lying? Because according to Peter, lying is a sin to God. In fact, that's exactly what Peter is saying in verse 4. If you lie, you are sinning against God. You know, if you think about it, you perhaps think, but why God? Was he really fair on Ananias and Sapphira? How could they die for lying? I mean, they did not murder anybody. Because we always think that they are bigger, bigger sins like murder, which actually deserves death. In fact, what we are learning here is any sin to God deserves a punishment. And Ananias and Sapphira are actually going to die. It's interesting to me that at least 4 times in the New Testament, at least in the book of Romans, in the book of Galatians, in the book of 1 Timothy, in the book of 2 Corinthians. Paul wrote all those books. And he actually was fond of using this statement, what I am telling you is true, I am not lying. What I am telling you is true, I am not lying. I always wonder, when I think about that statement, why would Paul continuously tell us that he was not lying? Then in the book of Colossians chapter 3, of course, Paul actually tells us that we are supposed to be new creations. Once we are baptized, we are supposed to put on the new self, and of course we take away the old self. And he actually says the old self is sin by taking out. One of the things that we take away is a lie. Don't lie to one another anymore, now that you are new creatures. A new creature does not lie. What that tells me is that lying is actually a sin. In fact, if you are in the business of classifying sins, one that you also need to put in those grave sins is lying. I was thinking about it the other time, and I actually saw that if you really think about many things that happen in our lives, some that even lead people to fights, it's actually because one has not been honest with the other. One is actually lied to somebody. If we stop lying, there are so many things that we can actually avoid in our lives. We should not lie. I may lie, and the lie is not detected by men. I may come and lie to you. You may come and lie to me, and I may not detect that you are lying. Neither may you detect that I am lying to you. But Peter is telling us and reminding us that whatever lie one says, God is going to pick it up. And of course, it's actually going to be held accountable. We are going to be held accountable for every lie that we are going to commit. What is a lie? I think if you really think serious about it, maybe we lie every day. There are some things that we actually say, subconsciously, which are not true, but we are just saying those things simply to go by. That's a lie. A lie is anything that is not truth. That's a lie. It doesn't matter whether such a lie has led us into some devastating effects. Even if it doesn't make it true. It's a lie. And we are not supposed to lie. Ananias and Sapphira lied. Their lie was that we have declared everything. Because they wanted everybody to say, these are very good people. These are very generous. When they were not that generous. They were generous if they had given $1 out of 1,000. That's what they decided to do. But they lied. And they actually were punished for it. If our lie is not detected by people, God will detect that. And we also are going to die. Spiritually, we will die. Another thing that I want us to see from this story is that husband and wife can actually connive and do wrong things. To those that are married already, you perhaps understand what I'm talking about. Maybe there is something that you actually agreed, which was not really the truth, but you actually agreed that this is what we are going to do, and you did it because you were actually giving each other some judge card. You know what we are doing is wrong, but no, let's just do it, and you actually go ahead and do it. Husband and wife should be a good combination before God. But at times, they are disastrous. This morning we were talking about Ahab. He is one such couple, Ahab and Jezebel, who were so wicked, and they don't give us a good example to follow. Think about Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, as we read about them in Genesis chapter 3. When they are going to connive and go against what God had said they were supposed to do, they went against it. And of course, in 1 Kings chapter 21, as I'm saying, as we have already talked about it, you are going to see Ahab and Jezebel conniving. Simply because they want to take Naboth's land, they are actually going to connive, and they did something that was wrong. And we, of course, we have another classic couple of Ananias and Sapphira. So, the lesson that we can actually take away is, if I am the husband, and perhaps the wife is the one who is suggesting something that is not right, I should stand and say this we can't do because it's wrong. If you are the wife and the husband is suggested that let's do this, when you actually see that it's wrong, you also need to stand your ground and say, this we can't do because it's a lie, it's a sin to God. If he says, I am going to do it nevertheless, I'm not going to join him in what he is doing. If I am the wife, let him do, the sin becomes, in fact, let my word be known that I don't approve of what you are doing. So many times because of pressure, you end up giving in. You are perhaps forced by the wife to do something that you didn't want to do. Usually husbands are forced by wives. It's not usually the opposite. But I'm not saying husbands also don't have influence. They can. I don't know who suggested this between Ananias and Sapphira. But at the end of the day, we know that both of them are going to be punished because of what they did. So we should not do wrong. If we are a husband and a wife, I mean, the reason why we are together is so that we can help each other to do right things, not of course to do things that are wrong. Let me also suggest the last thing that I want us to talk about that we can actually see from Ananias and Sapphira. If our goal in life is to impress people, there's no way we are going to run away from what Sapphira and Ananias actually did. In fact, people will not escape the sin of life if you want to live a life which is not yours. There is a lot of pretending in people. People want to do things for the people. They are not doing things for God or doing things for themselves. I mean, who of us does not do things to impress people? So many times we have a statement to say, if I do that, what are people going to say? I think they actually call that peer pressure. We always buckle down to what is happening around us. We don't live our lives. We tend to live the life of the people. I want to impress the people. So even if what I am going to do is wrong, I'll do it nevertheless because people are actually going to approve of it. If our goal is to live the life to impress people, then we are never going to escape life. What do you think would have happened if this story, if Ananias and Sapphira had not died, and this story had been heard by everybody, when everybody is actually being put in a list of those who donated? Where do you think Ananias and Sapphira would have been on the list? Considering that they had come and declared and said, whatever we gave you is everything that we got. Everybody would actually be saying, these people are heroes. You know, they sold it for everything. They never kept anything for themselves. They came and they brought everything here. Why? What is in their mind? To impress the people. So that people are actually going to think that we are generous. You don't need to donate everything that we have for you to become generous. You can still be generous even by donating little things. Why lie? Because we want to impress people. This is, of course, perhaps the biggest lie that we have ever done in our life, to try and impress people. By so doing, you are actually going to lie. Because if somebody asks you about what you are doing, you are not going to tell them the truth, because you want to defend what you are doing. In fact, the problem that I have seen with lying is that once you start lying, then you are never going to stop. Because the next thing you are going to lie to defend the first lie. And if somebody down the road is going to ask you again, you are going to say another lie to defend this lie, so that this lie is going to remain true. But the truth will always remain true. You don't need to defend the truth. If you say the truth defends itself. But a lie, you have to defend it. And it's a problem. In fact, it's not a problem only, but it's a sin before God. There are so many things that we say, especially now with the phone. You are seated next to somebody. You are just in a combi going to town. Somebody phones and they actually tell you that I'm in town over the phone. Simply because maybe they have a commitment and an obligation with this person to meet him in town at Bulawayo Center. If I say I'm already coming into town, somebody is expecting me So let me tell him that I'm in Mutare. I'm not here. I'm actually in Mutare. So you can't expect to meet me when I'm in Mutare. But are you in Mutare? I'm just giving that it's one of the examples. Cell phones are good. Technology is good. But it has actually brought a new line, a new dimension of life in our lives. Christians, of course, we have to avoid many of these lies because we have seen that a lie is not only a sin, but it's actually a sin against God. We can even lie in our heart without saying a word. That's exactly what Ananias did. But we can also lie by action or by saying a word. That's what Sapphira did. And both of them, they actually died because they lied. I hope and trust that this may help us control our speech. Paul actually says in the book of Ephesians, I think it's in Ephesians chapter 4, he actually says, don't allow any unwholesome thing to pass your lips. These are some of the things that he was talking about. Lying is one of those things that are considered to be unwholesome because you are not telling the truth. We should always be truthful and say the truth wherever and whenever we are talking. Thank you very much for your listening.